Okay, let's read some comments. Freddie Walker says, I remember reading the story of Bunky's enlightenment. Bunky was a Zen master. I've made comments about him before, but I did a recent video where I talked about it. I talked about him. His comment here is, it was so inspiring considering he struggled for so many years and almost died. Yeah, Bunky got really sick, and actually in his illness was when he started to have significant transformation or insight. This isn't uncommon. This is something I've wanted to sort of talk about publicly in the recent past, just because of comments I've had and correspondence I've had from people who talk about struggling with challenging life circumstances, right? And they'll often say something like, I wish I had time to just meditate or do retreats or spend a month meditating or, living more of a simple life. But I have kids, I have an illness, I have a lot of work, I have a lot of stress and struggle because of relationship, and just on and on, right? And we can all relate to this. We all know what this is like, where it's just like, you're so busy, right? You're so busy. When are you going to meditate? When are you going to inquire, and so forth? But what I want to say, and this is sort of related to Bunky, what he was struggling with was disease, right? When we feel put together, when we feel like things are just even keel and, pretty good, and things are just moving along like we expect them to, that's usually not when enlightenment occurs. That's not when awakening occurs. That's not when liberation occurs necessarily. It's usually more when things are sort of laden with struggle. When things seem like they kind of couldn't get much worse, or you're sort of forced into this kind of constant presence because of the challenges you're facing. So you're just forced to sort of stay very present and just deal with what's right in front of your face again and again and again, even though it's not what you would choose. And there's something magical about that when we sort of just give ourselves to life in that way. Often that leads to openings. So if you're in a situation where things just feel off the rails in your life, you're very, very busy, don't have time to practice, don't have time to, meditate for prolonged periods and so forth, don't lament. Awakening is just as available to you, if not maybe more than it is when things are smooth, when there's not a lot of distractions, when you don't have a lot of, responsibilities just constantly tugging on you. Yeah, but this can happen to anyone at any time. It happens in all kinds of situations. I just want to point out that often when there's a lot of struggle, a lot of life challenges, it's when things break open, I've seen it many, 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 many times. These disruptions are grace. Okay. Silent Loving said, loved it, referring to one of my videos. Thanks, Silent Loving. All right. Everything is perfectly managed in the unborn is a video I did recently. And then someone said, Zirkton said, that is so hot. This is funny. Clausy said, wild in this video, which was drifting toward thought. You said, what the fuck just happened? And I thought it was funny the way you said it. So I rewinded and listened to you say it again. And for some reason, my head looked to the right of the YouTube page, maybe because your head moved slightly to the right. And there's a video by my channel called WTF. What the fuck just happened? With 9 views. And then the last part of the comment is, what the fuck just happened? It's kind of funny. Okay, someone said, any advice about losing drive on the spiritual path? As more and more thoughts fall away, there's less drive to do things I used to do. Without the thought, I have to go to work, I'm not motivated to work. Without the thought, I should go to the gym, I'm not motivated to go to the gym. This brings up fearful thoughts about what the consequences of these actions will be. Any advice on how to handle this? This has been a challenge for a long time. Okay. So a couple things about this. One is I think it's pretty common for people to go through some form of this. Sometimes I call it like the spiritual desert, where all the things that used to strongly motivate you are less interesting, and some just fall away. Like, I don't know, various things, certain hobbies maybe, or even addictions just aren't interesting anymore. That does happen. We go through these periods where the typical motivations that we had defined ourselves by are not really what's moving all of this, and it never has been, but we start to see it more clearly. And there's reasons for this. There's like social endorsement and what we've learned from other people and all. We've often identified with those things and built a pattern of behaviors based on it. But when we start to wake up more, we start to realize it's just not authentic to us often. And so these things tend to fall away or be less interesting. That's part of it. And, this tends to fluctuate. Doesn't mean you'll always feel like that. And some things may fall away and you may have new habits or hobbies or whatever. Part of it is sometimes what happens is when we notice that we don't have the constant thoughts about doing something or whatever, then we have a fearful thought. And you kind of described that here that says, oh, well, if I don't have that thought that says go to the gym, maybe I won't go. I'll never go. What if I don't have the thought that says pay the bill? Well, I'll just never pay the bill, right? These fearful thoughts are interesting because they're kind of the mind convincing you of how important it really is, when at the same time you're seeing it's not really doing any of that. So it's not because you had constant thoughts about doing something that you did it. It just seemed like it. Okay. And it's important to digest that, because we can start believing the opposite thoughts that are like, oh, well, I won't do anything. And sometimes there are layers underneath when we start to dissolve identities. There are layers underneath of different kinds of identities that may be an avoidant identity that we didn't know was there, or an identity that's just tired, exhausted, and wants to rest. So we may come into contact with some of that, but it's not a problem, generally speaking. Generally, over time, you'll see the thought that says go to the gym and the thought that says I can't go to the gym because I don't have a thought that says I want to go to the gym. At some point, both those thoughts are just not there. So you'll either go to the gym or you won't, et cetera, work and so forth. Yeah, that's what I find is usually settles out for the most part. If there's something big to address on the emotional landscape around this, then you'll know. Just ask yourself, is there something I want to feel that I'm not feeling? Is there something that I'm avoiding feeling, right? Is there some fear here? Just feel the fear. Fear of responsibility, fear of not taking care of responsibilities, and on and on. So I think those things can be helpful. Yeah. And then someone, CPS Zen Run underneath responded to this comment and said, accept what is without resistance. There never was a self. This is everything and will unfold as it should. Nothing to fear. The difference, a chuckle, smile, laugh. Yeah. And here's the thing. If that works for you, great, right? If you can read that and just take it on board and it actually works, that's great. But there's a slippery slope here, because you can believe that, right? You can just believe, oh, well, everything just is. Doesn't mean that's not realization necessarily. I mean, for you, it might, for this person, it might be. But those statements of there is nothing, there's nowhere to go, the seeker can't find what it's seeking. So there's no point essentially in doing practices or inquiry. It's just sort of emboldening the seeker or something. So like, yeah, there's a truth to that that's realized in deeper realization. But you have to be really honest with yourself. Are you saying that because you learned it from watching other videos? Or have you realized it to some degree, or have you realized it to a deep degree? And that's very important, right? Because you could say that, to everybody, like just accept what is, right? There never was a self. Someone could hear that and go, yeah, there's never been a self. I'll just accept what is. They can be completely mind identified and had no shift in identity, right? So learning these principles is really important. Learning these principles happens. And it's really important to recognize that what these kinds of statements are pointing to is realization. That's the point. The point is the realization. If they don't result in that, then don't take them on board just because you heard them and they sound good, right? So yeah, if you can hear someone say just accept what is, and all of a sudden you experience equanimity ongoing, great. If not, which most of the times it's not going to be that. You're not going to just hear someone just say, well, just accept everything. And then you will be able to. That's usually not the case. So then you might have to do a little bit of work. You might dive a little deeper. You might do some work on equanimity or reactivity, right? There are things you can do, of course. Yeah. And also the no self thing is, again, I've said this many times, but to just start at no realization or an early stage of realization and just take on board the doctrine or belief that there's no self as just a belief, it's not helpful at all. It will be the self holding the view of a self, of no self. It'll be the sense of a self holding the view of no self, right? This is not about belief. None of this is, so taking on beliefs doesn't help. It has to be direct realization. And everything I do points to this, the book, the videos, etc. Right? So I just wanted to point that out, make that caution. Okay. Someone said, oh, this person's called It's Just Soup. I think the usernames on YouTube are brilliant, honestly. Last November on retreat at Boone, you spoke about this during one of the guided meditations. As I took in the transmission, it precipitated an energetic event in my body. When it was time to go to lunch, I staggered over to the cafeteria, still in a kind of daze. Once I sat down with my tray, I just stared at my food because I didn't see the purpose in eating. However, after a few minutes of this, I thought I had better act like a normal person, so I started slowly spooning soup in my mouth. As the fourth spoonful made its way toward my face, I looked at it and became stunned. What I saw in my spoon was soup, with nothing added, nothing subtracted. It was just soup. Impossible to explain, yet life-altering clear seeing. It was everything you just said in this video. I burst into tears, feeling the pain of all the seeking I had ever done, thinking I had to do something heroic to get somewhere. I love it. This video they're referring to is called Everything is Perfectly Managed in the Unborn. Yeah, it's when those things happen, those moments happen, it's incredible. And sometimes we will sort of lament and sort of grieve the seeker and see like how funny it is that we were seeking this. It's right here. You've heard it a million times, right? All the, anyone who's realized will hopefully say that to you. You're not going to get something out of somewhere else. There is no somewhere else, and there's no one to get it, and yet you were at a retreat. You were listening to a guided meditation. You were in samadhi. You were doing meditation. So you can't cause reality to be reality, but that work you do that's not what it's doing. It's actually undoing the seeker in a very sneaky way. That's the point, right? So just want to be clear about that. But that's awesome. When you see that, when you see just soup, or you hear just sound, just one bird call, you hear that. When you really hear it the first time, that changes everything. It's the most precious thing in the universe. There's nothing that beats that, right? And it's also very simple. It's not a big deal, but it's reality unfiltered. Reality unfiltered by the sense of a separate self is phenomenal. It's surprising. Someone says, I'll have what she's having, to that comment. Someone says, no remainder equals total intimacy. Yeah, I agree. Someone says, I have experienced the unborn a couple of days back, and it was terrifying. It's complete eradication, and there's no I, and so much anxiety fills the body that makes me want to cry and go to the hospital. And if I told anyone what I was experiencing, they would put me in a mental asylum. I want awakening, and I'm trying to achieve it for 2 years now, but I have got a brief glimpse. It's too much of a drastic shift and complete obliteration. I don't think I can handle it. What should I do? Can you please provide me some resources that would help me ameliorate this predicament I'm in? I think you're the only person that knows how to help. So this is important. When you feel something like a kind of cessation occurring, that what you're describing, the person, the seeming separate self, their reaction to it varies tremendously. Sometimes it actually gets very scared and it really tries to reinforce itself. It really pulls back into itself. And sometimes what that comes with is this feeling of, well, there's fear. You can see the fears in here, right? Like, I'm going to go crazy. If I said it to anybody, I'd go to an insane asylum. So you can see these fears that aren't just, those aren't just explanations to me. These are the fears that come in these moments, right? And they're very deeply seated fears that we have of not fitting in, of not being a person, of not having our resources that we need to live the life we think we need to live, and so forth. And they point to an emotion. The emotion is fear, right? So what you had was a fear response. You just had a fear response, and that can be rather intense, of course, but it's okay. And I talk about it frequently, the fear barrier and so forth. So the few things I would offer here is be really careful when you're approaching this way, not to label things, right? You can go 99% of the way to that first shift, significant shift in identity, and turn around because something scares you, and now will feel terrible. You go 100% and it won't feel terrible anymore. All that fear, all that dysphoria, that sense something's way off, the fear of obliteration, all that just goes. It's gone, right? Because liberation is not obliteration. Only the seeming sense of the separate self will lament the loss of the separate self. So from its perspective, yeah, it's not a desirable thing, but that's not what you are. That's the whole point. What you are is not that. And so again, this response, this reaction has some components that are belief-based. Watch the words you use to describe it to yourself. When this is going on and the thoughts come that say, oh my God, I'm going to be in an insane asylum, I have to go to the hospital, recognize those are thoughts. Those are no worse or no better than a thought that says, I want ice cream, as long as you don't identify with them. If you really believe that's what's happening, that you're going to end up in an insane asylum, and of course that's going to scare the crap out of you, right? But if you see that those are thoughts, and this is why I talk about this very frequently, noticing thoughts as thoughts, because otherwise you will get beaten up by your own thoughts, right? Even words like obliteration, complete obliteration, eradication, these are conclusions, right? In those moments, these are evaluations of what's happening. They're just evaluations. This is not about anything conceptual. So even if we use doctrines like no self, anatta, non-duality, like various pointers, these are just trying to correct a fundamental misperception, but they don't stand on their own in reality. There's not something you're going to find called obliteration, right? And when these insights clarify that I talk about, it's not like this void. It's not really like a void. There is a sense of void in a way, but that's only half the story. There's also a very, very clear knowing of a radical intimacy. That's deep realization. But you will have moments where there's a lot of fear. There's a disassociation. So what you're experiencing is a kind of fear and disassociation. Disassociation's already there. We have a stable disassociated experience in the mind as mind-identified humans. And then that can be magnified if there's fear, pushing those thoughts away until we realize, oh, those are thoughts. That's just a thought that says, I could go crazy. I'll leave my family. I'll die. I'll whatever, right? These are very typical thoughts when we approach awakening. Just notice them as thoughts. They're really not any worse or better than any other thought. They're merely thoughts. And that's what you've been beat up by all your life, right? Is thoughts. That's anxiety in a sense, but on steroids in this case. So yeah, you also can't fail at this. So if it scares you and you back off from it, and then later on, all of a sudden you're actually interested again, I really want to go back to that edge. It's very strange, but there's an intuition that knows how to lead you there again at some point, and it probably will. So it's okay. Maybe do some emotion work as well. If it feels like there's, the fear is really intense for you, find a way to just sort of address that, feel into it, experience it directly. Just fear as a sensation without any kind of storyline. Okie dokie. Someone said everything is okay. Yeah, I think so. What is the difference between the I am sense and presence? Well, if someone experiences the I am sense, they will think presence and I am sense are the same thing. When non-dual realization occurs, let's say, then it's very obvious that I am sense is not presence. It becomes obvious that the I am sense is a sort of very subtle overlay and a summation of vivid non-dual appearances. And the vivid non-dual appearances are what is present, is what presence is actually. And also the empty nature that comes with that. So like many things, your experience of, I think I have a video actually, what I mean when I say presence somewhere. It's a couple years old. But like with many things in this whole process, your experience of them will evolve as realization clarifies. It just does. But what's the point in making a distinction, honestly? Really, right? Knowing that, does that help you? Maybe it does, but why? Look into it, And better yet, find out what presence actually is. Get as close as you can to it. What do you actually find there? What do you find in the sound? What do you find in the sensation? Where do you find an I am sense? What is that like for you? Where do you find it? Just keep looking closer at it. Whatever's there, don't make it right or wrong. Don't say, well, no, this can't be real presence because it's I am, or that's not helpful. It's more helpful to just investigate what your most authentic and honest experience is right now and just go closer to it, see what's there. Someone says, oh, this is Ball Smasher. Ball Smasher's back. This is a video called Balance is Critical in Deep Realization. It says, bro, can you not make the no self so scary? Can I not make it scary? I don't know. I can't change your experience of reality. There will be some fear along this awakening path. There just will be. And that's okay. You can handle it. You have the bandwidth for fear. It comes and goes like everything else, But again, when there's clarity, when this clarifies, it's deeply peaceful. You wouldn't trade it. Okay. Thank you for your wonderful videos. This is from Contemporary Classical Guitar. Thank you for your wonderful videos. I've been consumed by them. I would be very grateful if you could answer my question. It is, did I hear you say that whatever we think, feel, and perceive is not it? Or what is it is the awareness behind it that gives it light or something like that. At the point is that there's always awareness behind whatever we're thinking or perceiving on the phenomenal level. Boy, I don't know. I don't know if I would say something like that. I'm not even sure if I understand what you're actually asking, but whatever we think, we feel, and perceive is not it. I'm not sure what you mean by it. Or what is it is the awareness behind it that gives it light or something. Some people do like reify awareness. They talk about awareness as this sort of like a background or a basis or a ground of being, right? Like there's just pure awareness, and you are pure awareness. Like you are that. I have a video called The Awareness Trap. You might want to check that out. This is a misperception actually, but it's a misperception that's not too hard to dispel if you're willing to do some work in the sort of non-dual spectrum. I have a playlist called Non-Duality that talks specifically about that. It's also like Fetter 6 and 7, essentially, if you want to look through the Fetters playlist and so forth. And then you'll see, now awareness isn't behind anything, and it's not really illuminating, so to speak, because illuminating would be dualistic, like it's shining on something or something's appearing in awareness or even as awareness. It's just that the experience of awareness and the experience of the texture of sound, for instance, are really the same thing. That's the best way I can say it. Awareness isn't a space in the way I'm talking about it. It's not a space. It's not a space in which things happen. That's the mind. That's the thought space that feels like that. It turns things into space. And in that space, there's room to maneuver and things you could do. And it's like, not like that. Just vivid appearances popping. Like those flash cameras from like the, I don't know, earlier 1900s or whatever. Just pop, pop, pop. Sounds, sensations, so forth. Someone said, this is Marie. So needed, so helpful, major shift happening. So many, many, many thanks. Hope to thank you in person someday. Awesome. Good to hear it. Balance is critical in deep realization. That was the video they were referring to or commenting on. So I'm really happy to hear that. I love it. Just love it. Someone said, I'm not there yet, but the clarity I've gained from watching your content has brought me closer and closer, inch by inch, to true realization. I've had glimpses of true and pure being with the gratitude I have for that fleeting experience is immeasurable. Thank you for your wisdom and perspective. You're welcome. Also, there certainly is this instinctual sense of things clarifying. There just is. This is, in a way of speaking, a progressive process, but it's a little more like regressive. But what's happening is perceptual filters are disappearing. So it's not like someone's getting closer to something, just to be clear. It's more like the perceptual filters are disappearing, and then the experience of intimacy, it becomes more and more obvious, more and more primary. Let's see. Okay, someone says, this is loopy. Ego mind relates, right? It's a relational experience, isn't it? When ego mind is within, then there is no relating. I'm not sure what that means. One dimension, no actual separation. Ego mind is an activity as if there is separation. I would agree. No one has ever seen an I. I agree. The I is assumed to be an actual thing rather than the consequent experience of assumption. Yeah, I mean, the way you're saying it, I'm not fully understanding exactly why you're using those words, but it is true. You're not going to find an I. Try it. Try to find an I that's not a thought that says I. It's actually a really good contemplation or inquiry for anyone who really is curious, right? I mean, you're the center of your universe, right? You're the thing you think about all the time. All the thoughts are about you or how this relates to you. The thoughts are always self-centered. They just are, right? You're 100 times more interested in your life and your problems and your situations than anyone else is, of course, right? Generally speaking, except maybe your family, your kids or something. But still, it's often related back to you. All that's true. Don't you think we should look for the I? Don't you think we should actually see if it's actually there? Or at least know its nature? At least find it? It seems absurd that we would have never looked for it, right? But you can actually go looking, of course. So it may be very valuable, you know? Then someone says it becomes obvious that, or this person said it becomes obvious that using the concept of I is not a satisfying way to express that which already is. Yeah, this is interesting. I mean, so for me, when the realization of no self became very clear, and it was kind of momentary. It was just like, it was getting clearer and clearer in a way. Things were falling away. I didn't know this at the time. It just felt emptier and emptier in a way, or just felt clearer and clearer, more and more spontaneous. But then when the sense of the self was just seen to have never been there, and I couldn't experience it anymore, it's almost a little bit it's almost like the opposite of what you're saying here. Because you say the I is not a satisfying way to express that, which is, using a concept of I is not satisfying. Yeah, but at that point, you don't need to negate the I. It's so obvious that there's no self. So then a thought about I or me, or a statement about I or me in the relative world is fine. It doesn't matter. It's just as illusory as everything else. It's just as much an illusion as everything else, right? In a way of speaking. So then, yeah, there's no aversion to talking about I in the relative sense at all. Zero, because it's like, what does it matter? Yeah. Now, it's not true for everyone. There is a kind of neo-Advaita approach where it's like, of course, people who speak this way on YouTube, they don't speak this way in their private life, just so you know, because their friends and family would throttle them. But yeah, they'll say, oh, no, I didn't say that. It was just said, or, this is all just happening, right? This is all just happening. There's no I in it and all that. But they're doing that to point. They're doing that to point for you, for anyone watching, to kind of reorient your attention in a totally different way, and to actually see what's what. They would say they're not even doing that, but I'm just saying, like, in my opinion and experience, the value of that kind of pointing is that it can cause a sort of significant paradigm shift. But for me, there's just no need to negate a pronoun. A pronoun that says I, to me, is just a practical or pragmatic word, right? Try to have a conversation with somebody when you don't refer to yourself. It's almost impossible if you're trying to actually communicate information and stuff, right? So I just want to be clear about that with the self structure not there in my experience. And when I say my, of course, I always mean that conventionally speaking. That's all I mean. But how else are you going to talk about it? I could say something awkward like what happened here was, right? But to me, it's just like saying I, just in a different way. So anyway, what happened here was when the self-sense was just seen through completely, there was just nothing there. There's nothing here. There's still nothing here. It's just not a thing. It doesn't exist. It's not a force. It's more than a thing too. The experience of it is more than a thing. It's not just seeing that you can't find it. It's actually feeling in the most clear way that it's just not here. There's just nothing like that here, right? When that happened, almost immediately it was noticed how funny it was to resist like an idea of me or I or a concept of I. It doesn't matter. Those are thoughts. They have nothing to do with anything. And thoughts do not create reality. Like, as I say all the time, this is a non-conceptual realization. It has to be. So then, yeah, there's no need to negate the I or me or you or talk in ways that are conventional unless you're pointing, unless you're doing that to help, someone sort of investigate the nature of their own identity, right? Anyway, so that's my experience of it. Okay, let's see. Shelby Hambridge said, talking in vague language with no scripture reference. Oh no. I guarantee you this is a short, because people comment about they make comments about scripture and Christianity on my shorts a lot. I don't know why that is. Okay. Someone made a kind of wisecracking comment to that comment. They said, because scripture is not vague. Oh no, because it's not spawned thousands of interpretations. Right. Yeah, I don't feel, by the way, if you actually care, I don't feel the need to quote scripture or doctrine or dogma or anything. That's not how this realization propagates or comes forth or whatever. I don't even know what it's coming from. Honestly, I don't know why the words are chosen the way they are or whatever, but I can tell you I don't have a strong sense of having to prove something because I'm referencing certain doctrine or certain group's doctrine or a certain way of believing. That kind of mentality would definitely be a selfing mentality, a selfing experience that, you have to prove yourself or be internally consistent or be consistent with a certain group or a way of thinking or whatever. I don't have that at all. I don't care. I just try to be as accurate as I can in the pointing. Now, sometimes I do look up something, polycanon, sayings of the Buddha or Shin Shin Ming or whatever, anything. I quote all kinds of things, songs, just because it just strikes me that moment. That's it. It's not because I'm trying to say, hey, I have authority because the way I see things is the way this person from 2,000 years ago saw things. That doesn't have value to me, just so you know. So I don't really care about scripture per se. And what I'm pointing everyone to is that they also don't need that. You don't need scripture any more than you need social endorsement to be what you really are, to wake up to your true nature, to investigate your true nature, to continue to investigate the nature of truth itself, living truth. You don't need any permission. You don't need any doctrine, dogma, group, teacher, period. That's it. It's that easy, right? Well, I don't know if it's easy. That's that simple as far as permission or endorsement, right? And in my opinion, the vast majority of that stuff is distorting anyway. Hierarchies and authority and permission and all this, it has its place, I guess, or it had its place in the past. But when it comes to realization, it should be able to transmit itself directly, in my opinion. And it can, for sure. It should be able to transmit directly. You should be able to feel it. Oh yeah, I get that. I feel that. It worked for me because before I had like these kind of insights that started with, well, I don't know if it started with that, but one of the major ones was talking to a professor in a class in college. And he was talking about awakening, enlightenment, Kensho, but he was talking about it in a very different way. It didn't sound like doctrine at all. And he was transmitting to me that it's actually possible. And it's not about something that monks do. It's not about something from 2,500 years ago. It's about something to address your own suffering right now. And I was like, whoa, that's possible, you know? And he said, yeah, it is, essentially. That's a direct transmission, and that's the whole point. I think in Zen and Mahayana Buddhism, this kind of a tenet is direct mind-to-mind transmission outside of the doctrine, outside of the sutras and so forth, right? Which I think is critical. The sutras are powerful in a lot of ways. They have a lot of really good pointings in there, but some of it's hard to like, you know, track because of the language and the other stuff that gets thrown in, just like the Bible. You know, there's things that are so hard to read. You're like, wait, what is this even about? So yeah, doctrine can be helpful. You can find pointings in it, but often I find what really transmits is people who are like you. They're in the time frame you live in. They're relatable to you, and yet they can point in a very direct way, directly from their own realization. That's direct mind-to-mind transmission, and that's what this is all about. This whole channel in the book is about that. Cool. Someone said, this is Atmaram Samarath. Was getting a bit discouraged with the training to experience non-dual in the visual field, but this one really seems to work. I've had non-dual sensations for quite a while and couldn't figure out how to train to train this in a way that made sense to me. Yeah, and so they're talking about this video called Dissolving Duality. Yeah, it's very precise in the way I pointed in this video, so check it out. Okay, this is the MLM Gold. Beautiful. I often get these visceral urges to grab onto the next thought or God to fix and manage and then end up down the rabbit hole, chasing my tail in disordered chaos. But it's actually really good that happens, because if you don't, then you just stay identified with thought. The fact that you could start to get disoriented in thought identification, that's really good, because it's completely distorting that world. They say, but being with the urge and letting it dissolve in presence actually opens the door naturally to this loving devotion to God. That's great. Exactly. So letting it dissolve. You know, there's a sense here in this comment of a sort of surrender, and that's key. There's less fixation or aversion and craving, and the heart opens more readily. Beautiful. Just be willing to let it open and open and open, and be willing to be surprised about what you actually find or what you don't find. Good. Good. This is someone who feels very willing to go through this process. It's just nice. Awesome. Okay, let's see. Someone said, what is your source translation? I was doing the Shin Ming. You could also call it Affirming Faith and Mind, in this video called Balance is Critical in Deep Realization. They said, what is my translation of the Shin Ming? It's called, if you look up, like Google this, Affirming Faith and Mind, and you'll see it by the Red Clay Sangha. They have this exact translation. It's also the translation we always used at the Zen Center of Denver, which was in the Kapilo Roshi lineage. So I'm not sure if that went all the way back to like Yasutani and those guys, but it's what we used. And I think it's my personal favorite, definitely. I've read the others and I think this one's best, but who knows? All right. Very cool. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate all your questions and comments. I appreciate your dedication to truth and your willingness to go through this crazy, wild, and wacky process.